On one of the most popular beaches in the Mediterranean, there is a hotel where the beds are still made. The pool is empty. The lobby doors are open. Nobody has checked in since 1974. And that is not even the strangest ghost town we are going to talk about today. Europe has more ghost towns than most people realize. And we are not talking about ancient ruins on postcards. We are talking about places where governments drowned entire villages under lakes on purpose, where a dictator ordered a destroyed town to never be rebuilt and forced his own prisoners to build the replacement, where a village that existed since the year 967 was emptied for a military exercise, and 80 years later, the army still has not given it back. Some of these places are perfectly preserved, some are forbidden, and some are still dying right now while the last 20 residents refuse to leave. Here are 10 ghost towns in Europe you are not supposed to know about, and we are starting with a place that survived literally everything, except the ground it was built on. Number 10, Craco, Italy. Craco is older than Rome. Let that register for a second. People settled on this hilltop in southern Italy in the 8th century BC. Over the next 2,700 years, this place survived Greek colonization, Norman conquest, the Black Death, Napoleon, and a bandit king who took the town by force during Italian unification. 2,700 years. And what finally killed it? Clay. The hill Craco sits on is made of clay that shifts when it rains. Landslides had been a problem for centuries, but in 1963, the ground moved so badly that the government evacuated the last 1,800 residents to a valley below. They were put in tent cities, looking up at the hilltop they had just lost every single day. Then a flood in 1972, an earthquake in 1980, each one taking a little more. Today, you need a hard hat and a signed waiver to get in. The Norman Tower still stands. The church still holds the mummified body of the patron saint, dressed as a Roman soldier in a glass case since 1792. And 6 times a year, descendants come back for festivals. The town is dead, but the people refuse to accept it. James Bond was here. The Passion of the Christ was filmed here. From a distance, it looks like an Escher drawing. Stairways and houses stacked on top of each other, reaching toward a sky that has been trying to knock it down for 3,000 years. Number 9, Doel, Belgium. Now imagine a ghost town that is not ancient at all. Imagine one being made right now, 30 minutes from Antwerp. Doel is a 700-year-old village on the banks of the Scheldt River. On one side, the second busiest port in Europe. On the other, a nuclear power plant with 2 cooling towers, like something out of a dystopian film. In the middle, fewer than 20 people refuse to leave. This place was home to over 2,000 people. It had Belgium's oldest stone windmill, built in 1614. The ancestral home of Rubens' family is here. For centuries, Doel was a small fishing village, ordinary, alive. Then in the 70s, the government decided Antwerp needed more port space, and Doel was in the way. What followed was a 50-year war between a village and a bureaucracy. Protests through the 70s, 80s, 90s, buyout offers, legal battles, and when none of that worked, in 2008, 100 riot police showed up. It did not work. Some people just do not leave. Here is the thing about Doel that I find genuinely strange. As the house is emptied, street artists moved in. Today, almost every wall is covered in murals. Giant rats, headless wild boars. The whole village looks like a post-apocalyptic art gallery, with a nuclear power plant as the backdrop. Art. One pub is still open. It serves Belgian beer to the last holdouts and nuclear plant workers on their lunch break. The church only opens for funerals and the occasional wedding. Though honestly, who is getting married in Doel is a question I cannot answer. In 2022, the demolition plans were officially scrapped. The government offered former residents the chance to buy back their homes. One family came back. One out of more than 2,000. Number 8. From a village fighting to survive to one that was emptied by a single piece of paper. South of the Turkish resort town of Fethiye, there is a hillside covered with 500 roofless stone houses, 2 churches, fountains that once watered a town of 10,000 people. Until 1923, this place was called Lavisi. Greek Christians and Turkish Muslims had lived here side by side for centuries. The Christians worked as artisans on the hillside. The Muslims farmed the valley. The town had newspapers, schools, a leather industry. It had been growing since the 14th century. Then 2 governments decided to solve an ethnic problem the way governments do, by moving people like furniture. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 forced a population exchange. Greeks in Turkey went to Greece. Turks in Greece went to Turkey. Over 1.2 million people moved in one direction and 400,000 in the other. A Norwegian scientist won a Nobel Prize for organizing the logistics of it. That is not a joke. That actually happened. The 6,500 Christians of Lavisi left. Turkish families were brought in to replace them, and they refused to stay. According to local accounts, the new arrivals believed the town was haunted by the ghosts of Greeks massacred in 1915. They walked in, looked around, and walked right back out. And then, there is the detail that stayed with me for days. When the Greek residents left, they dug up their ancestors from the cemetery and took the skulls with them, but they left the rest of the bones behind. Near one of the churches, there is a charnel house. It is still piled with human leg bones. 100 years later, nobody has come to collect them. Today, it is called Kayaköy. Tourists pay a few euros and walk through streets where the weeds have won and the church frescoes have nobody left to pray to them. Number 7. This next one is the story I kept coming back to. Not because it is the most dramatic, but because it might be the most quietly devastating promise ever broken. In the middle of Salisbury Plain in England, 7 miles from the nearest town, there is a village with no postcode, no phone reception, no residents. You will not find it on most maps. Imber has existed since at least 967. It is in the Domesday Book. The church dates to the 13th century. For 1,000 years, it was a tiny farming community where nothing ever happened. Until November 1st, 1943, every resident was called to a meeting in the schoolroom. They were told they had 47 days to leave. The army needed their village to train American soldiers for D-Day. They were promised they could return in 6 months. Nearly all of the 152 residents left peacefully. They believed they were doing their part. The war ended. They waited. 6 months, a year, 10 years. The army never gave Imber back. Decades of protests and court cases changed nothing. The Ministry of Defense kept the village permanently. They used it for urban warfare training in Northern Ireland, Kosovo, and Afghanistan. They built concrete bunkers between the medieval cottages. The original homes were shelled and left to rot. The village blacksmith was named Albert Nash. His wife said he died of a broken heart weeks after the evacuation. He was the first former resident buried in the churchyard, and very likely the last. There are no former residents left alive. Imber opens to the public about 50 days a year. Vintage red double-decker buses ferry visitors in. Volunteers keep the 13th century church standing. Everything else is demolished or used for combat practice. The 1951 census, the first after the evacuation, recorded Imber's population as 0. It still does. Number 6. What happens when a ghost town is not an accident, but a punishment? 2 villages called Belchite sit side by side in northern Spain, 40 minutes from Zaragoza. One has 1,600 residents. The other has bullet holes in every wall and has not been lived in since 1939. In August 1937, the Spanish Civil War came to Belchite. For 15 days, Republicans and nationalists fought through the streets, house by house, room by room. Water was cut off, supplies were gone. Over 3,000 people died in a town of 4,000. The Republicans won the battle. They lost the war. Franco retook the ruins in 1938. And here is what makes Belchite different from every other bombed town in Europe. Franco did not rebuild it. He ordered the ruins to stay exactly as they were, as a monument to what happens when you resist him. A new town would be built right next to it. And who built it? 2,000 Republican prisoners of war. Forced labor. Living in a camp beside the construction site, they built the replacement for the town they had fought over, under conditions so bad that the work dragged on until 1954. 15 years. Let me say that differently. The losing side was made to build the town that replaced their own victory, and then they had to live next to the ruins that reminded them why. Today, you can only visit Old Belchite by guided tour. Pan's Labyrinth was filmed here. The clock tower barely stands. Bullet holes and mortar damage scar every wall. Franco meant the ruins as a threat. After he died in 1975, they became something else, a monument to what civil wars actually do to the places caught in between. Number 5, Skrunda 1. Latvia. Somewhere in the Latvian countryside, surrounded by farms and forests, there is a city of 10 apartment blocks, a supermarket, a school, a gymnasium, and a nightclub. Underground bunkers connect the buildings. You will not find Skrunda 1 on any Soviet-era map, because it was not supposed to exist. Skrunda 1 was a closed city, built in the 60s to house the families of soldiers who operated a radar station tracking Western European airspace for incoming nuclear missiles. 5,000 people lived here, going to school, buying groceries, dancing at the nightclub, while their fathers watched radar screens for the end of the world. The entire city existed for one purpose: to see the bombs before the bombs arrived. The Soviet Union collapsed. Russia kept the station until 1998, then pulled out. Everyone left. The radar was dismantled. And a city that was designed to be invisible became visible. Over 25 years of emptiness. Weeds through the concrete, furniture rotting, bunkers flooded. And in 2024, Skrunda 1 made international headlines for the most ironic reason possible. British Royal Marines who had trained in the abandoned buildings filed a lawsuit against their own Ministry of Defense. They had been sleeping in the apartments, which turned out to be full of asbestos. A city built to protect people from nuclear annihilation is now poisoning the soldiers who use it for practice. If you have made it this far, subscribe. It is free, and I promise you, number 4 is worth staying for. It starts with Abba. Number 4, Varosha, Cyprus. I need you to understand what Varosha was before I tell you what it became. In April 1974, 4 Swedish musicians visited this beachfront district of Famagusta, Cyprus, on a promotional trip. They played an informal show for UN peacekeepers on the beach. It was the first time Bjorn, Wumd, Benny, Agnetha, and Frida ever performed together. They would later become ABBA. That is the kind of place Varosha was. In the early 70s, it was not one of the most popular resorts in the Mediterranean. It was the most popular. 45% of every hotel bed on the island was right here. 3 miles of white sand, high-rise hotels, nightclubs, designer shops on John F. Kennedy Avenue. Elizabeth Taylor stayed at the Argo Hotel. Brigitte Bardot walked the promenade. Richard Burton drank at the bars. Mediterranean glamour at its absolute peak. Now let me tell you how fast it ended. July 20th, 1974. Turkey invades northern Cyprus. By August, the army reaches Famagusta. 35,000 Greek Cypriots flee south in a single night. They leave everything: clothes in closets, cars in driveways, food on tables. They think they will be back in a few days. They never came back. The Turkish military fenced it off immediately. Barbed wire, armed guards, no civilians, no maintenance, no repairs, just time. For 50 years, one of the most famous beach resorts on Earth sat behind a fence and rotted. Balconies collapsed. Trees grew through hotel lobbies. Sand buried the ground floors. Swimming pools turned green with algae. The lobby doors I mentioned at the start of this video are still standing open. A UN resolution in 1984 demanded Varosha be returned to its inhabitants. It was ignored. One woman who grew up in a house taken during the invasion told this story. She found a box of belongings in her new home, photo albums and journals that were not hers. She asked her grandmother who they belonged to. Her grandmother said the real owners of this house. In 2020, parts of Varosha reopened. Tourists can walk a few designated streets. Sunbeds were placed on the beach, directly in front of the crumbling towers. There were nearly 5 million visitors by the end of 2025, but most of it is still closed. The fence is still there. The original owners, now in their 70s and 80s, are still waiting. This is not a ruin. This is not ancient. This is a modern city that was alive 4 hours before it died, and it has been dead for half a century. From a city killed by politics to one killed by physics. You know this story, or you think you do. Pripyat, Chernobyl, the abandoned Ferris wheel, the school books on the desks. It has been in every documentary, every ghost town list, every YouTube video about abandoned places. But there is one detail that most people skip over, and it is the worst part. Pripyat was built in 1970 to house the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. By April 1986, 50,000 people lived here. The average age was 26. Schools, cinema, swimming pools, and a brand new amusement park were scheduled to open on May 1st for the May Day celebrations. On April 26th, reactor number 4 exploded. The government knew within hours. The residents were not told. For 36 hours, children played outside while radioactive particles settled on the streets, on the playgrounds, on their skin. Mothers hung laundry. Fishermen sat by the river. And here is the detail. On April 27th, the day before the evacuation, the amusement park was opened for about 2 hours. Children rode the Ferris wheel and the bumper cars, while the air around them was radioactive. The official explanation was a trial run. The real reason, according to people who were there, was to keep the population calm before the announcement that they had to leave. They opened a playground to distract people from a nuclear meltdown. Then 1,200 buses arrived. Residents were told they would be gone for 3 days. Leave your pets, pack light. Nobody never came back. The Ferris wheel that children rode on April 27th has become the most recognized symbol of nuclear disaster on Earth. It operated for about 2 hours total. The exclusion zone around it will be unsafe for roughly 20,000 years. That is longer than all of recorded civilization. Number 2. After Pripyat, I want to bring you somewhere quieter, but not less devastating. In the far west of South Tyrol, near the Austrian border, there is a lake with a 14th century church tower rising straight out of the water. Just the tower, the church, and the village around it is at the bottom. Most people who see this image assume it is fake. It is not. In 1950, the Italian government approved a hydroelectric project that would merge 2 natural lakes into one reservoir. To do this, they needed to flood 3 villages, Graun, Reschen, and parts of St. Valentin. 163 homes, 500 hectares of farmland, all of it underwater. The residents did everything they could. 7,000 signatures, petitions to Rome, protests. A few farmers reportedly refused to leave and had to be physically removed from their land. It made no difference. On July 18, 1950, workers climbed the tower and removed the bells. 1 week later, the church was demolished. Then the water rose. Within months, villages that had existed for centuries were gone. Only the tower remained, too solid to demolish, too tall to fully submerge. It stood in the rising water like a finger pointed at the people who did this. Farmers who had worked the same land for generations were given replacement plots they had never seen. Many said the compensation was insulting. Today, Lake Rescan is one of the most photographed spots in the Alps. In winter, the lake freezes, and you can walk across the ice to touch 700-year-old stonework. There is a legend that on quiet nights, you can still hear the church bells ringing. That is not true. The bells were removed before the flooding. But the story survives, because when a government drowns your home, you need to believe something was not lost. I saved number 1 for last because it is the hardest story on this list. It involves a church too, but this church was not drowned. It was set on fire, with the women and children still inside. Number 1, Oradour-sur-Glane, France. 22 kilometers from Limoges, in the quiet countryside of central France, there is a village where time stopped on June 10, 1944. The doctor's car is still parked on the main street. The baker's oven still has its iron door. Rusty tram tracks run down the road. The seamstress's sewing machine sits exactly where she left it. Little bicycles lean against the wall of the school. Nothing has been moved, nothing cleaned. The French government ordered that this village remain exactly as it was, forever. Before that day, Oradour-sur-Glane was unremarkable. 1,600 people, a church, a few shops, a cafe. It had no connection to the resistance, no military value, no reason for what happened next. And honestly, nobody has ever fully explained why the SS chose this village. One theory is they confused it with another town 30 kilometers away that actually had resistance activity. Another is retaliation for a captured German officer. The truth may be simpler and worse. Sometimes there is no reason. On the afternoon of June 10th, 4 days after D-Day, about 200 soldiers of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, sealed every road out of the village and rounded up the entire population. The men were separated from the women and children. The men were divided into 6 groups and marched to barns and garages around the village. The women and children, all of them, were locked in the church. I need to tell you what happened next, because that is what Oradour exists to remind us of. But I want you to know, this part is difficult. The soldiers opened fire on the men in the barns. Then they set the barns on fire. In the church, soldiers placed a large box among the women and children. They lit the fuse. It exploded, filling the church with smoke. Women tried to break through the windows. Soldiers outside shot them. Then they set the church on fire. 643 people were killed in less than 2 hours. The mechanic, the baker, the school teacher, the cafe owner, every child in the school. 6 people survived. 5 men who played dead. under the bodies in the barns, and one woman, Marguerite Ruffanche. She was 47. She climbed through a church window, was shot, fell, and crawled into a bush where she hid until the next morning. After the war, Charles de Gaulle visited the ruins and ordered the village preserved, exactly as it was. A new Oradour was built nearby. The old one became a memorial. 300,000 people walk through those streets every year. You pass the garage with rusted cars, the hotel with collapsed bed frames, the school with tiny desks that will never have children sitting in them again. And in the church, on one wall covered in bullet holes and shrapnel scars, there hangs a plaque. It is a memorial to the villagers of Oradour-sur-Glane who died in the First World War, a tribute to the dead of one war destroyed by the next. Robert Hebris was 18 on the day of the massacre. He survived by lying under the dead in a barn. He spent the rest of his life telling this story to anyone who would listen. He died in 2023 at 97. The last survivor. He said, "They call me a survivor, the one who made it. I am a man. I am a witness." Every one of these places was once somebody's main street, somebody's school, somebody's view from the kitchen window while the coffee was still warm. Ghost towns are not history. They are being made right now. In Doel, the last 20 people still sweep their doorsteps. In Varosha, the owners are still alive. In Imber, the army still has not kept its promise. The forces that empty places are the same: war, politics, corporate greed, and the earth itself. They have not gone anywhere. The only difference is whether anyone remembers. If this was worth your time, subscribe. We are just getting started.